Welcome to another edition of Around the Table with Powerful Women. I'm Wendy Love Edge.
I'm Joy Caffrey.
And our guest today is Serena Caffrey. Serena is a visual and performance artist, writer, and fertility awareness educator. Welcome to the show, Serena.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so delighted to meet you. I love your mother.
Yes, my mom.
But you are amazing in your own right. When I was reading your bio, I just couldn't help but think how committed you are to your art. And I'd love to talk a little bit about some of the projects that you've been doing.
Sure.
So first of all, I think it's important to talk about what is performance art, because many people, I don't think, understand what performance art is.
Totally.
And how it's different than theater performance art.
Right.
I think. Yeah, so give a little definition
Sure.
for us.
Well, I'll speak from my own experience. I'm no scholar in performance studies whatsoever. I come from a visual arts background.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, performance art differs from theater in that it typically is not presented in a black box theater, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not relegated to locations that are meant specifically for the performing arts. Mm-hmm. So when we go to a concert, typically there's a time, 7 p.m., there's a location, and we know more or less what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what performance art asks is for the human body to become a medium of art making without the same set of rules that the more traditional performing arts ask of a piece. Mm-hmm. So performance art became more well known in, at the time, contemporary art circles in the 1960s, with artists who were already a part of visual art scenes, but started working in more physical ways.
Mm-hmm.
And this work was presented through video footage or photography or live, typically in gallery spaces or in public spaces. And it asks frequently for whoever is performing to use their body, perhaps in a way that's atypical to everyday life. And what else can I say?
That reminds me of some of Alex Gray's work that I was exposed to a long time ago. In his very early art, he was doing performance art in gallery spaces. And at the end of our episode, we'll put some links to a couple of performance artists.
Sure.
Okay, let's do that.
It's interesting because you explore all aspects of art, it seems. You're a writer and a musician. And so this, coming into this space of performance art, was it challenging since the other art forms have more definition to them, I guess?
Not at all. It felt like, so I'll just speak from my own experience. I was studying visual art at Bard College, where I studied for my undergrad, and I had an incredible professor, Julianne Schwartz, who's an amazing artist, and at the time I was dealing with a lot of health problems, and for me, performance felt like a beautiful way to make my work about my life and to bring the gap so much closer. I still really struggle in my visual work right now. I feel like I'm using paper, I'm using pastels, I'm using materials that are very much relegated to the arts. They're understood to be materials that one would use in an artist studio. And when I first started making performances, what I began using as my materials were things that I encountered in my everyday life. So my first performance that I still really relate to and feel really alive in whenever I re-perform it is a piece that uses rice. Because at the time I was really, really sick and was recommended by a practitioner to remove grains from my diet. And I loved rice, and I had so much rice, and I said, what am I going to do with all
Remove
of
all
this?
grains from your diet.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
it's
so,
hard.
Yeah. And since, thankfully, I've started eating rice again. Very grateful for that. But at the time, it became a symbol for this aching and seeking health and kind of the endless feeling of being tied up into cycles of life I couldn't escape and I had no control over.
Mhm.
So a lot of my earlier performances were about this feeling of futility,
Mhm.
of not being able to get my head up out of this just, just, it's kind of like Sisyphus, always rolling up the hill and for it to fall back down.
Yeah. That's so, I'm sure so many people can relate to those things, the cycle of life, the human condition, what we all have to deal with, our bodies,
Right.
Yeah.
And so you're using your experiences and your body to show this.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
Was it healing for you as well?
Well, that's an interesting question. I feel like in some ways it's healing, particularly socially, to be witnessed in that space, because I think those very basic struggles are frequently hidden from our day-to-day relationships. And especially at the time I was in college, so my daily concerns were very different from my peers' daily concerns. And I felt a little alone in my experience of sickness as such a young person. And so to be able to present this work with or without context, and for people to be able to relate to it in a really fundamental way. And I think this piece, perhaps more so than others, is the most easy to relate to for audiences who have less exposure to performance, perhaps. And that social validation and witnessing is very healing.
Can you describe just briefly, because I've seen some recordings of some of her performance pieces.
Yes.
So one, the chopping onions left a lot of impression on me, but also the rice, of you climbing up a ladder and spilling this rice, and then share maybe with our audience of what happened after.
Sure. So so typically my performances, and frequently many performances, have a very simple set of parameters, and we can call this a performance score, which is similar to a musical score. When musicians get on stage to play a piece together, they have something in front of them that tells them the way the piece will go, and they
the
can
flow of it,
the flow of
rhythm
it.
of it.
And in performance, we can also use a performance score. Same with dance, and it's a very simple set of instructions that gives the core idea of the piece. So the rice piece, the very simple score is that I had, at varying times, 20 or 40 pounds of white rice that I carried in a blanket to the top of a ladder. And when I got to the top of the ladder, I let the blanket go, and the rice would spill, depending on how tall the ladder was, far onto the floor, And then I would climb down the ladder, gather the rice, put it back into the blanket, climb back up, and the cycle would repeat and repeat depending on how long.
And you would gather the rice with your hands,
my body,
with her body,
with my hands and feet, and.
And isn't that so? When you're describing it, I'm thinking about these cycles and patterns that we all get in and doing the same thing repetitively, whether it's with food, making. You understand that you can't have these grains, but that you crave them, and so you're in that cycle where you're trying not to have it, but then maybe you one day decide you're going to have a little bit, and it makes you sick, and the cycle starts repeating.
Right.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I also was thinking a lot about the ways in which I participate in compulsion, that I sometimes would be cooking, and even if I was tired or thirsty, I would forget to tend to my basic needs, and I would be stuck in this pattern of labor, and it felt almost inescapable. So you mentioned an onion piece. I made another piece where a performer was chopping 200 pounds of onions for hours and hours.
She just kept chopping and spilling them onto the floor. Well,
someone else was cleaning the floor with a dirty cloth, with a dirty clay pot. Yeah.
I was thinking as you're saying that, so one of my sons is a chef, and we talk a lot about how hard it is on his body, and for hours and hours, how he's standing and bending and doing the same movement, and how hard it is on the body, and you can't tend to your own basic needs because you have tickets you have to fill, so and that's just one example in society how that applies.
Yeah, and I want to talk about I'm impressed with some of Serena's really long endurance pieces.
I want to talk about that.
And I would love for you to talk about that, because I'm like, how did she go to the bathroom? How did she drink? And so can you describe either the walking
from sunrise to sunset, and also the ocean one.
Sure.
And then tell us about your internal process.
Sure, and this will be a great way to circle around to the original question you asked about care and if these practices have felt healing for me. And so since graduating, I've had the privilege of doing a couple of residencies, and I was in Nebraska last summer and did a piece with a collaborator, Hugh Hopkins, who's a friend and photographer, where we fasted from dawn until dusk and walked towards the sun the whole day. So in the morning we were walking east towards the rising sun, and then with no timepiece, just looking at our shadows, at high noon we turned around and continued the rest of the day west. So the piece was called Walking East, Walking West, and each Hugh and I had a blessing or a mantra that we were meditating upon. And he took some photos of the day, and we both wrote about the experience. And since then, I've made a couple of other all-day pieces, one in which I was sitting in the desert in Joshua Tree National Park, in the same place all day, kind of acting like a sundial, and more similar in scope. And I think a challenge with these pieces that are less clearly metaphoric, like the food pieces, which were also more sculptural. I was kind of manipulating materials more. These, I'm more living in a location and participating, interacting with my environment, both internally and physically. I wonder, personally, to what extent do these works want to be shared with others, and to what extent are they private experiences?
Right.
And if I do have personal insight, or if I'm transformed, how do I talk about that in a way that people, especially who aren't familiar with performance, feel intimately some of the revelations I have while I'm performing?
So I want to say, as someone who viewed it, so I had the opportunity to watch one of Serena's 8-minute clips with some music intentionally scored in the background of her sitting in the desert for this 12 hours or
I think it was 10 hours.
10-hour period. I'm blown away that she's still sitting in the same position. She's still sitting in the same position. And you're watching the day happen around her, with the landscape and the clouds and the music offering that. So to me, it was very evocative. Like, it made me want to look at, how do I spend 12 hours? What's my internal process during that time? I mean, I used to be a yoga teacher, and we used to talk about, like, even holding a yoga posture for 3 hours was phenomenal, right? And here you're doing it for an entire day. And I understand the concept that some art is meant to be private and personal art, and some art is meant to be public art. Like, some poetry is either just for you and your lover, right? Or you and another person. And I appreciate that you're weighing that discernment of choice of what's for you and what's for you to share. And I understand that not a lot of people understand performing arts. For me, I was fascinated, right?
Immediately I was thinking about, because I do a lot with health and wellness, and immediately I was thinking about the person who is so anxious that they can't leave a spot on their couch for 12 hours, or depressed, or, and how this happens in the cycle of emotions in life, that people, are doing this just naturally as a part of either their pathology or just who they are even, so I would imagine by doing that kind of with a clear head, you're really learning a lot about yourself in the environment.
And I want to talk about a clear head, like what's happening internally. And you mentioned to me, actually when I get dehydrated, I go into a different state. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening inside that head.
Sure. Well, a friend asked recently, why do things for so long? Why sit the whole day in the desert? And that day in particular, I was really noticing, for the whole morning, I had such a mind of limiting belief. And I think part of this has to do with the line of work. There's not much money in performance art. You know, I'm asking for help and people's time, and it takes a lot of planning and resources to bring everything together. And meanwhile, I work full time. So in a way, it feels very risky for me to be committed to this practice and this line of work, if we'll call it that, because ultimately at the end of the day of sitting all day, some people could argue, what's changed? You know, what purpose does this serve?
Perhaps you.
yeah, it's so true.
Which has an effect on all of
Right,
us.
and then that's my question: how can I carry that forward? Because I hope that this work is of service to the earth and to others, in addition to my own growth.
Yeah, so is there a sense of a sense of responsibility to carry it forward?
Right. Yeah.
Versus just throwing it away or discarding it or not valuing it?
Right.
So what you do with it afterwards seems almost as weighted as the piece itself.
Totally.
Yeah.
And to answer your earlier question, you know, there are so many minute thoughts about, oh, I should have done this, I should have done this. You know, there's a very anxious mind for me at the beginning of pieces. And as the day goes on and I witness the stillness around me, I have found that I slowly settle. And for me, that's what's helpful about the length of the piece and the durational aspect, is that it gives me that cushion to really find myself in a place, and then to really see what I'm a part of.
We were talking a little earlier before the show about commitment. It's a huge commitment. The time to do it, the travel, all of it, and to stay with it for that length of time. I think many people in our society have difficulty with commitment, and so it could be an example, just that in itself, to people, that you can make a commitment such as this that doesn't have, you know, money attached to it or anything. It's just a piece of art that could stimulate some growth, either for the artist or for the observer. You know,
Yeah.
it's very cool.
There's another piece that, if you don't mind me talking about a little bit, is I love the ocean. I grew up on Long Island by salt water, and I crave going there. I recently was just at the ocean in Florida, where my parents live, and got to spend some time on the beach and standing in the ocean and, you know, watching the rhythm of those waves. And it feels the way that you could stare at a fire. You know, it was so easy that I could stare at it. But even just standing there, like, maybe 10 minutes, then I felt like I needed to move. And you recently, Serena, just did a piece where she was standing on the beach when it was low tide, watched the ocean come up, all the way up to her, and then recede again. Again, commitment, length of time, but now also bringing in like the cycle of the moon, the tide. So maybe, to me, again, I was inspired by the thought of participating in the rhythm of the earth. Participating in it. So can you add anything, or do you want to say?
Yeah, well, is it observing or participating or both? And is it a little frightening, the waves coming up? That's some questions I have.
Sure, yeah, it was. I was really nervous for that piece because I didn't grow up by the ocean, so I wasn't sure what to expect. And I think part of my interest in it was for those simple questions you were asking of, you know, well, what would it be like to witness a whole cycle? You know, I find myself moving so quickly through the needs of life, the hustle to, you know, earn my keep and have a roof, and, you know, I found myself craving to create the opportunity to witness something of such simple and innate beauty in its whole form. And interestingly, with this piece, since we're talking about commitment, what ended up happening in the late afternoon is I was feeling actually really conflicted about my choice to stand there all day. And for a brief period, about half an hour, I slipped out of position. I was still in the same place, but I wasn't standing. I fell to the ground and then slowly rose again. And this moment of deviating from the score is actually what's been of most interest to me of late. Asking myself both why, but also investigating that failure with an open mind. And really, I don't say failure in a pejorative way, but actually, what about that experience is my teacher? And a lot of what came up for me, I've been putting into writing. And I've been listening to that experience and the internal conflict I was having. So there's both the beauty of the tide and the rhythm, and then there are also these much more complex things that I was feeling around land use, and I'm new to the West Coast, so displacement and lineage and colonialism and gender identity. So it actually became a much more complicated experience than the simple gesture of just standing in the tide.
Which kind of reminds me of the human condition. Like on one level it can seem so simple, and then it's so nuancedly complicated. Do you have anything that you want to read? I was learning that besides filming some of these pieces, you were then later writing about them. Do you want to share with our audience a little bit about this piece? This is the ocean piece?
Yeah, this piece is called Tidal Body. This is a work in progress.
No worries.
Moments of ecstasy come down to this push and pull, the not knowing of my limit and not knowing the consequences if I push it too far. In the late afternoon, I watch a father and his daughter boogie boarding to my left. Why am I standing here? What is missing we left by choice. Sometimes the only power is in leaving, or in silence, a violent silence. I'm learning to name this. To become strangers to our kin. This is what we've done. Yeah, so that's just a short segment, but in this piece I found myself exploring the frustration of being a woman alone in natural landscapes, hiking on the beach. And I found that people were always asking me, oh, are you alone? Are you alone? Or do you feel safe here? And I commute by bike. I ride my bike a lot. And the next section is someone saying, oh, you know how to use your gears. Good for you. Ha, ha, ha. And I frequently felt like gate kept. People were gatekeeping these spaces that I felt I so belonged in on this land and in the earth. And then in that same sentiment of outrage of like, don't ostracize me from this earth, I belong here, I also felt, well, do I belong here? Is this our land? Because this land has been stolen. And the beach where I was performing is Tongva land and Aktajaman territory, which are the native tribes who were present in these spaces prior to settler colonialism and are still alive and have tribal governments in operation today. So kind of this intersection of gender identity and seeing my own role as a settler, as a settler in California, and how, it's complicated.
I can it gives rise to more and more questioning versus answers. Right.
It's kind of like you're a scientist searching for the answers to many questions that we all have, and you brought up interesting points. If you were a man, for instance, hiking by yourself or doing this, would they have those same questions of you? Probably not.
Right. And I ask that also of friends of color, of Indigenous women, of non-binary folks, of queer folks, of anyone who doesn't look, I still carry so many privileges. And when I was sharing some of my experiences, I was asking my community, do you experience this? Do you experience this? There's an epidemic of murdered and missing Indigenous women in the United States and Canada that people don't talk about. And I wasn't thinking about those women when I first had those experiences. And through the process of this piece, I'm realizing how interconnected these issues are and how I can and want to leverage my voice as an artist insofar as that offers me privilege or platform to bring up these issues that aren't seen or spoken of so frequently in our society.
Yeah, so what I can hear is within yourself, like a rising yearning to be of service by connecting some of these cultural concepts and the challenges or problems within them, and give rise to awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the question about healing, we're still answering, I
Right,
think.
yeah.
And not only for yourself, but perhaps for all of us,
Mhm.
by gaining this knowledge through doing these pieces.
Mm-hmm.
It's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier you mentioned about going off score, and I just wanted to back up a little bit because you're also a musician.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you go, do you ever go off score with your music?
Oh, interesting. Well, yes, I think improvisation is such a beautiful practice for everyone, whether they participate in a certain form of art making or not. To me, it's about being quiet and listening to the space around me and feeling courage and feeling an intrinsic desire. I think improvisation is so much about desire and listening. And to answer your question, I'm not a great improviser musically, but I aspire to be. You know, for me, I'm still just plucking away at what I know. But yeah,
And
it's
it's
a
really
great question.
self-taught, which
Nice.
right, which is
And do you incorporate any of the music into the performance pieces?
I have a little bit. The score that you mentioned for the desert piece was written by a composer, Antonin Fait. So I've been collaborating with other musicians and hope also to incorporate live scoring if ever I represent videos or films of these pieces to live audiences, to keep that performative aspect really alive.
I feel like we could talk all day.
I
This
know,
is such
and
a
I think
deep,
we have about
deep
3
subject
minutes
and
left.
such a deep individual. So,
Yeah.
And so where can people find some of your work?
Sure. I have a website. It's just my name, serenacaffrey.com. And I try to be active on Instagram. And my handle is Essyre, which is the name I play under musically, and it's spelled ESSYRE_.
I didn't know how to pronounce that.
Essyre.
Say it again.
Essyre.
Essyre.
I see.
Okay. And if there is one thing that you wished people could know about performance art and their ability to be open to it or
Sure.
absorb it, what would you wish your audiences could understand?
Well, I think that performance in a different way than theater, and I learned this lesson the hard way recently when I presented in a theater, performance often allows audience members to be more active participants. They're not as captive. So if a performance is happening in a public space or in a gallery where people can move around, it really gives agency to the audience member to be their own guide and investigator. They can investigate the piece, they can leave it, they can come back to it. And I think what I would request and what I try to offer to other performers is a sense of patience and curiosity, because performance at a fundamental level is a really absurd thing. Sometimes it does generate something tangible, but often it doesn't. And so I think there can be a frustration with that. Why can't I get it? What is it doing? Why is it doing it? And I think what all art asks of us is to ask that question of ourselves and to see it with a curiosity that opens our mind as opposed to wanting an answer right away.
Yeah.
So I think maybe to let people know that it's okay if you can't figure it out.
Yeah,
right
which is what
away.
you described your process as, right?
Right.
That more questions rose than answers, and more portals of, oh, what about this? Yeah, I think our time is just
almost
perfectly
up.
up.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you want to mention
yeah.
your website one more time?
Yeah.
Sure, it's serenacaffrey.com.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for
I'm
having me.
delighted that I got to experience Serena in yet this new way.
Yes.
Here's to a, get our cups, a soulful, joyful,
and
and
edgy
G
life.
life. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.